So let's start. You have to remind me to switch off when I'm done. Okay, so you remember, so last week, I'll summarize in maybe in a few minutes. Let's summarize now what we did last week and where we are going. So last week, it was really the class about the escape problem. So this is last week, or 2 weeks ago really. So we look at the exit problem. And what was the exit problem is how long it takes, in average, for a particle to escape from a domain where there was one attractor. So you have an attractor, you have a dynamical system, x dot equals b of x. There was an attractor at, let's say, the point 0, which is 0. So the way to look at it is when you expand b of x in Taylor series, it can be written as a matrix bx plus o of x, and the matrix B has all the red part of B, and if it's a real matrix, you take all the eigenvalues. So the real part of the eigenvalue of lambda of B, they are all negative, so that all trajectory is attracted. At the boundary, we say B dot n is negative, that any trajectories that enter here is going to end at the critical point. And then we discuss if we had this stochastic dynamical system is x dot plus square root of 2 epsilon w dot, but this is the classical drift plus noise. And epsilon is small. What we said is that the mean first passage time is solution of Laplace epsilon Laplacian u. B gradient u, this is from the class that we did, equal -1. U equals 0 on the boundary, so this is omega, this is on the boundary. And we said last time that u epsilon, so u is a function of epsilon, and we looked at what happened in the small epsilon case, when epsilon is very small. We said that u epsilon of x has the following structure. It is a constant c epsilon that we calculated, and there was a boundary layer, and the boundary layer was like something maximum. I mean, this was this constant c epsilon, 1 minus exponential, and there was a function which was depending, so there was a function here that we also calculated, phi of x divided by epsilon, such that when x, so this is when x is in the boundary layer, and this is for x outside the boundary layer. So what is the boundary layer? The boundary layer is a region here that depends on epsilon, that is so this is the region that we've been interested in. This is the boundary layer that I do not define here precisely because we saw it coming in the class. It depends really on this epsilon. This is really something of size epsilon, right? The boundary layer is of width epsilon. And what we did last time, it was a 2 or 3 hours class. It's how to calculate C epsilon, and we found out that C epsilon has to do with the constant kappa epsilon that we calculated, exponential of, so it was minus minimum of, so when B is the gradient of a potential, gradient phi, so the minimum of phi on omega minus the minimum of phi over d omega divided by 1 over epsilon. Yeah, and then there was a constant that we calculated. So this was really the so the mean first passage time. Yeah. with a plus here. So C epsilon goes to infinity as epsilon goes to 0. Right? And K epsilon is a positive constant. And so, all right, I'm not going to redo everything. So today, so the first part here is going to be about killing processes. And then in an hour or two, we'll come back to that problem for the case when we have a limit cycle. So we'll come back to the problem that is not addressed, we haven't addressed last time, because for the case of the limit cycle, we will be interested in the case where trajectories, if you reverse the time, they cycle and converges to the cycle here. So this is called the limit cycle. So I want to discuss this point later on. So when you go to the right time, all trajectories are converging toward that point. And we would like to, so now instead of having b dot n equals 0, we are exactly in the critical situation where b dot n, we're not in a situation where b dot n equals 0 and not strictly negative, which is a major difference. And now for this, I'm going to show you the entire WKB method. That is how you find solution of the equations by looking at an expansion for the probability distribution function, P epsilon of x, which is going to be of the type K epsilon of x, exponential psi divided by epsilon. This is called the WKB approximation or formal expansion. Right, so we will discuss what is the equation satisfied by psi, by k, and how you solve them, and how finally you end up calculating. I'll show you how to calculate from this, not only the rate to escape, but also the entire spectrum. That is, all the eigenvalues of this operator, the operator of L. So this is the operator L star of U, epsilon. This is called the adjoint operator. All right, and so we will see what is going to be the eigenvalue for the operator L, which is solution of LP equals lambda P. Right, so the lambdas are called the eigenvalues. So we'll see that they are actually quantified. They are discrete. So they are the eigenvalues. And actually, the first one is known to be real. It is lambda 1 is real. But the other one, they are not real. The lambda k can be written as ak plus minus ibk. And of course, for this, you are interested in to find the value. What is ak, what is bk?
Except the first one, all the ones are not real.
This is what I'm going to show you. The reason, fundamental reason, is because when B is this is the classical theory. When B is a gradient, it has a variational form, and this is known that you have an operator which is positive, compact, and self-adjoint. That all eigenvalues are real. But when it's not self-adjoint, then it's not. So then people knew that the spectrum was not real. But what the difficulty is to calculate it. And why, and we'll see why we need it. This is what we're going to do in the next, not immediately now, but this is the following of this part. Right, so the question here, is find the eigenvalues, or calculate them, find the eigenvalues lambda k, at least if we cannot calculate exactly, asymptotically, what does that mean? The same meaning as we have found here when we calculate this. This is in the condition that epsilon is small. So in the asymptotically when epsilon is small, less than 1. So this is going to be our question, and I will tell you why this is important. It came from a problem in neuroscience. So I'll tell you later. All right, so this is a summary of what we did next week. And now before starting, I would like to discuss all right, so last week I invite you to look at the movies or the notes for all the details. Okay, so now we should start with a property of the mean first passage time. Then we go to killing measure, and then we come back to this. So before continuing on this, I would like to discuss one important property of mean first passage time. Is how you calculate mean first passage time from to go from A to C when you can go through a path B. So this is called additive property. Additive property of the mean first passage time. So suppose you have a domain. You start at position X here, and suppose this is, so let's call it sigma A, and this is sigma I. So you're interested in what is the time it takes to go from a point X to sigma A. And obviously from this picture, but we are going to prove it, it's not trivial, this is the mean first passage time it takes to go from X to any point sigma I inside the intermediate one, plus the time it takes to go from sigma I to sigma A. Right, so to go from here to here, this is the time it takes to go from here, then from here, you can go to here. But as I've drawn here, you may come back to the domain. So we'll see that there is more into this formula, that it's not just you go from here to here and then from here to here, because when you start exactly at this point, you can eventually come back. All right, so we have to account for some kind of renewal, so that some kind of the trajectory can come back. So we're talking here about for example, think about Brownian motion. This can also be true. So with the diffusion coefficient, it can also be true for any type of stochastic processes where you have a diffusion tensor that is the matrix is invertible. And for example, we said this has application in biology, because if you are interested in calculating, and this we will do that in the next time we'll see, if you are interested in calculating the mean first passage time, so this is an example of application, that if you are interested in calculating the time it takes to go from here to here, this is called a dialectic spine. You can calculate the time if the formula, you want to apply the formula. This is the first time it takes to arrive up to here region. So this is going to be the time for this. And then starting from here, you can estimate the time it takes to go from here to here. And this will be the second term. So this is the application, this is the time, mean residence time in the dendritic spine, which we'll do later. Mean resident time in dendritic spine, which is a microdomain that is important in neuronal cells. All right, so now let's prove. So this is the theory or theorem or whatever. Is it mine?
Yep.
Okay, I answer later. Mean resident time in dendritic spine. All right. So basically, you can calculate if you can identify substructure in a geometrical structure. If you have substructures, the idea is you can use this formula to calculate the mean first passage time that exists from one structure at a time. Okay. So how do we solve this? How do we prove this? So for Brownian motion, let me remind you, d Laplacian u equal -1, u of x equals 0 on sigma a. So x, so I just giving the proof here for Brownian motion. Suppose you have this. This, you start at any point here, and this is the total mean first passage time to go from a point here to this. You agree? So by definition, u of x is exactly equal to tau x sigma a. The solution of this partial differential equation, by definition, it is this. Okay, so now let's define the function phi. Let's define the function phi of x, which is equal to the time to go from a position x to sigma I, plus the integral of sigma I of the Green's function multiplied by the time to go from, so I write from, let's say, x, let's try to go to sigma A, when you start at position y and you integrate dsy. So what is here the Green's function? This is what we have calculated in the previous class. The Green's function is solution of Laplacian J equals 0 on omega I, which is the domain inside the sigma I. Right, d omega I equals sigma I, and J equals delta Dirac at point y. So we discussed this 3 or 4 classes before on sigma I. Okay, so the idea is we are going to show that this phi of x equals u of x. So how we do this? We are going to use the fact that you have a partial differential equation that has a unique solution. So I'm saying that this is a different way to write this, so that's going to work. That is, let's plug this into this equation, and let's see what do we get. If this satisfies this equation, since this equation has a unique solution, and the solution is this will be equal to this. And this is exactly the decomposition that we have in mind. So it says exactly what is the form of this coupled term, sigma I, sigma A. Okay, so what is the, for x that belongs to sigma I? So we have now, what is this equal to? So if x is in this, what is phi of x? So the mean first passage time to a point, so this, by definition, this is the mean first passage time to sigma I. So this is exactly this, but u of x equals 0 on sigma I. This is the mean first passage time to sigma I. So what is this equal to? So sigma, by definition, tau sigma I of x. This is solution of d Laplacian equal -1. And tau sigma I of x equals 0. And sigma I is the mean first passage time to this. This is the mean first passage time to the internal structure. So by definition, phi of x, if x belongs to sigma I, by definition, is going to be 0. And now what is this equal to? For x in sigma I, this is the integral of the Green's function of x of y, tau. Now this is sigma A of y ds y. So we have to integrate over sigma I. So what is this equal to? This is dy. So this, we have the delta Dirac. If x belongs to sigma I, this Green's function, it's 0, except at a point y where it is equal to delta Dirac. So delta Dirac multiplied by a function is equal to the function. So this is sigma I. So this is 0 plus tau sigma A at, so this is at y, so this is at x. So we have now on the boundary that phi equals tau on the boundary. Right? Now what we are left with is to show that now phi satisfies the partial differential equation, that it is equal to -1. And if we have this, we will see that the function phi and the function u do coincide on the sigma I, thus they are equal in this region inside in here. And this is what we wanted. So y phi is solution of the Laplacian, so we have to do it. What is Laplacian phi? Laplacian phi is Laplacian tau sigma I plus Laplacian of the integral of sigma I j, x, and y multiplied by tau sigma A y dsy. So by definition, Laplacian tau sigma I, this is equal to -1. Okay, I assume here d equals 1, so I'm not going to, I can multiply this by d. So this is exactly -1. Laplacian of this, I can enter the Laplacian inside. By definition, Laplacian j equal to 0. This is the Green's function, so this is 0. So whatever it is, this is going to cancel. This is exactly -1. So we conclude by the fact that you have an elliptic partial differential equation, linear elliptic partial differential equation, because there is a unique solution to the mean first passage time time equation. So this is classical in PDE. This is because it is elliptic PDE, linear elliptic PD with a Laplacian. So this is called maximum principle. I'm not going to discuss this in detail. Maximum principle. So we have phi of x, which is equal to u sigma a of x. Which means that this, I'm not going to rewrite it, but this is exactly equal to sigma a of x. So the time it takes to reach from any point inside this domain, any point inside, the point outside, this is the mean first passage time that you have to calculate by putting 0 observing boundary condition on sigma I. And then this is the more difficult part. This depends now on, so you see, this is why you see that there is a renewal equation. The tau here is equal to these guys. That's the hidden difficulty, because when you are exactly here, you can come back into the domain. And that's why you renew it again. That's why you have this called a renewal type equation. And the kernel here, this is the Green's function. So this is important. And so, but in general, we'll have to, does it bring something to have such a decomposition? The answer is yes, and I will show you the example here, that you can calculate mean first passage time for this domain using this type of equation. We'll redo it and we'll calculate explicitly each term. Okay. So now we are done with this. This is called additive property of mean first passage time. Now what I would like to discuss, this is the last point of the general theory, which is called a killing measure, killing process and killing measure. This is important when we do chemical reactions and special chemical reaction. So we're going to call this part, this is killing measure in the Fokker-Planck equation. Okay, so what are we talking about here? This is the general question of how you terminate a trajectory. Right, so this is general remark or introduction. How shall we, how a stochastic trajectory is terminated so suppose you have a domain. You start at point x and you have a stochastic equation, x dot equals b of x plus sigma of x w dot. W is Brownian, b is deterministic, sigma is a diffusion tensor. So usually you terminate when you give 0 observing boundary condition by when the trajectory arrives here, you stop your simulation and the trajectory is not coming back. So this is a way to terminate, and how we how this is imposed. This is not imposed. It is imposed in the partial differential equation by putting a boundary condition, which is u equals 0. Now, how it is imposed if you do a simulation is you stop your simulation here, if you think about trajectories. Now, what happens if you want to terminate? Suppose this is a rabbit, it runs, and you shoot on the rabbit. If you shoot, you can terminate these trajectories before it reaches the boundary. So now how do you formulate this into the equation? What's the formulation for this? Right? So suppose we introduce a rate of a killing rate that depends on x. So suppose you are in a piece here of the space, and the piece of the space, there is the rate of termination. Rate of termination is a function that you impose, k of x, such that the probability of termination, the probability during time step delta t, probability to terminate a trajectory, let's say in the box delta x during delta t is simply k of x delta t, so this is the probability in the box delta x. So you multiply by delta x. All right, so now how this k of x that we have imposed, that this is something that you wish, now how does this enter into the equations? All right, so for this, what we need is to go back to the Fokker-Planck equation. So the Fokker-Planck equation for a trajectory, the general trajectory can be written as we have seen, dp dt equals L of p. And now I'm going to show you artificially how you add this term, minus k of x, p of x. And so this, by definition, we're now going to see that p x of t, this is the probability that the trajectory is at x plus dx, it's at time t, conditioned that the trajectory is still alive, that the trajectory is alive, and it started, let's say at 0, it started at point x, or let's say point y. So this is p, x, and t conditioned on y. That is, the solution of this equation, if you solve it, means the particle is there, otherwise the probability to find the particle would be 0, right? And we will see that the rate at which the particle are killed at a given position x is k of xp. So this is the term that describes the disappearance of your particle. So that the solution of this equation, when k is 0, of course, you don't care about the fact that the trajectory is alive. So the fact that a trajectory is alive, we can do this by introducing a killing time. So if tau is your killing time, that is the first time at which the particle is killed, tau k, this is the killing time by definition. So what is the meaning of this? This is the first time that x of t is killed. This is removed from your process. So this is to say that the time to be killed is bigger than the time t when you are. That is, at time t, when you look at your process, the particle has not disappeared. All right? And so, how you can look at this? Again, I'm not going to give the detail of all the calculation, but basically, the solution of this equation is called the Feynman-Katz. This is called the Feynman-Katz representation, Feynman-Katz solution. So the Feynman-Katz solution of this equation, of equation star, so this star, is exactly px of t. You can have it by looking at the expectation, which is the average of the initial condition. So let's call it p0, the distribution of your particles. So for example, if it starts at one point, is the delta Dirac. Px of s exponential minus the integral of 0 t k. So this is here t. This is ds. Condition that x0 equals x. So what is the meaning of this? X is solution of the solution of the stochastic equation. So you take the solution of the stochastic equation, which is this one. So this is the stochastic equation. So you take the solution of this, you introduce it into this integral, and you average over all realization. This is a solution of this. This is a formal solution. But we'll see that the interpretation of this term is that you are killing on a trajectory, along trajectories. And so how do you see this? Right, so this is, I'm not going to show that if you plug this into this, it works. You can use the Ito calculus. We have done it when this is 0. This is exactly, you have this is exactly what we've done before. Now, how do we give interpretation of this equation? So let's take the time between 0 and t, and we decompose the time. This is 0, this is t, and now we cut it into pieces. What's the probability? What is the probability of being killed, of the time to be killed is bigger than t? What's the probability that the killing time is bigger than t? Well, if you start at 0, so condition that we started at 0, so what is the probability to be killed? The probability to be killed equals k delta t multiplied by the element dx. So here, if we do this at a point x, so we have t0, t1, and this is tn. So which means that each time you are not killed. If you want to survive up to here and to be killed, so you are not killed, you are not killed, you are not killed. So what's the probability of not being killed? It's 1 minus the probability to be killed. So the probability to be killed is 1 minus k at position x, let's say of t0, multiplied by 1 minus k at position, so we have a trajectory, and here we are taking discrete point. This is xt0 and this is xtn. And along this trajectory, you are not killed. So you are not killed at all of these discrete points. So 1 minus x of t1. And you multiply, so you take the product of this up to 1 minus k t n. Right? So you have a product. Now, if n goes to infinity, that is, you are taking tk plus 1 minus tk equals capital T divided by n. If n goes to infinity, what is the limit of this product? So, you know, the product of 1 minus k, here I forgot delta t everywhere. There's a delta t here. So my k of tk, delta t. What is the limit of this when n goes to infinity. So how do you do this? You take the log converts the product into a sum, right? So if you take the log of this, the log of this, let's call P this product. Let's call it Pn. So log of Pn is what? Log of Pn is the sum of the log of 1 minus k. Let's call it k of q, q from 1 to n, multiplied by delta t. So if you make a Taylor expansion of the log, what do you get? You get 1 minus, so the sum of qk, k from 1 to n, multiplied by delta t. And by definition, delta t is capital T divided by n. So it's like 1 over n multiplied by t. Right? And qk is exactly q at position x of tk. So what is this? What is this? This, when n goes to infinity, is the sum. It's simply an integral. This is the Riemann sum. So it's integral from 0, if we start at 0, from 0 to capital T. So there's a minus of k at position x of s ds. So now if we take back from the log, take the exponential, finally pi of n converges to the exponential of the integral of 0 to t of k of, so t is at any t, of k of s ds, which is exactly the term here. So this is the survival time, this is the survival probability, the probability that along the trajectory you are not killed, right? Okay. Now this is important to understand all of this concept. Let me give you now some application. So again, I'm not proving that this is the solution of this. I'm giving you the interpretation of what is k of x p. When we have this represents the killing term, the fact that the trajectory disappeared with a certain rate at position x. This is exactly what you have in chemical reaction. Chemical reaction, the particle can disappear where it binds, with a species that is located somewhere. So you can see this as the concentration of the other species multiplied by the probability that you meet. Okay, so now let's go to some examples so you understand why this is important and how you can calculate with this. Suppose this is example, here in dimension 1. So the probability distribution function for a stochastic particle, which is purely diffusion, satisfied with PdT equals, let's say, ddp dx squared, this is pure diffusion, minus k of x, p. So suppose you are in the 1D channel, you have a certain killing rate, k of x here, and the particle, let's say, either the particle can start at position A, and now we are going to start asking questions. For example, how you calculate the probability that a particle, let's say, will ever reach A or B before being killed. What is it? So suppose you know this is the solution, this is the Fokker-Planck equation. This is really the survival, we should write it survival Fokker-Planck equation. As we've said just before, the interpretation now of P, this is the probability that you are at position X at time T, and you are still alive. This is the interpretation of this. So, for example, let me ask you the following question. What's the probability to escape before being killed? How do we formulate this in terms of the solution of this equation? So what is the probability to escape, which means escape at A or B, at A or B, before being killed? So let's assume that you start at position A. So probability of xt of x0, let's say condition on y, suppose this is the delta Dirac at position A. You start at A. This is the starting point. You start at A and you're interested in when you're going to escape. At A, little a or B. How do you write this probability in terms of little p? P is an infinitesimal description. It's the probability. What is the meaning of this? P, x, t, and y. We already said it. This is the probability to be at x at time t and to be alive. Condition that it was alive. Conditioned of being alive. Right? It is not destroyed. Now I'm interested in the fact that you leave the entire domain. So what's the probability to be just alive at time t? The probability to be alive, probability that the particle is alive at time t is the integral of a to b of p x t condition on y dx. This is the probability that if you make a picture with your camera, you see you have the particle, right? So now, what's the probability that it ever reached the boundary? So let's call tau killing. This is the first time to be killed. And let's call capital T the first time, it's a random time, to reach the boundary. So I'm interested in this. I'm interested in what's the probability at the time. So we said to reach the boundary, which means that what's the probability that capital T is what? The time to reach the boundary. You should reach the boundary before being killed, no? So this is the time that capital T is less than tau kill. This is exactly how you formulate in channels. What's the probability when you start at A? What's the probability that you, for example, reach B before returning? So you formulate this in terms of timing. And now we want to calculate this in terms, for example, of fluxes or probability. So you start here. I'm interested, this is the first question we ask. So we haven't solved it. Here we said, if this is a particle to be alive. Now I'm interested in more. What is the probability that you reach the boundary after the process is finished? All right, so now let's go back to the equation and you will see things will become clear. Let's integrate this equation with respect to the space. Okay, let's integrate this. I'll integrate the equation with respect to space. So this is the integral from a to b of p d dt. So I change the order of integration. This integration of the second derivative, this is the integration of the first derivative, which is the flux. So this is d dp dx at b minus a, right? Minus k of x, p x of t dx. Integrate between a and b. All right. So now let's do one more integration. Now I'm interested in what happened at the end of the process. As the particle reach the boundary or not? So I have to integrate this. What is the end of the process? I have to integrate this equation from 0 to t. But what is t? T is yeah, t should be some kind of time that where it is ended. But what is the t when the process is finished?
Particle size of A or B.
Yeah, we will see how this tk and t comes. So either A and B, you exit at A and B, but how long you have to wait? In principle, you have to wait infinity. This is at the end of the process. So if you integrate this from 0 to infinity, what do you get? So I integrate this from 0 to infinity, which means if you integrate something which is a derivative, you just get this. So this is the integration from A to B of p at infinity minus integration at p at 0. Now what is p at 0? P at times p of x, condition on y, dy.
Delta x.
That's right, so this is equal to, the entire thing equals to,
Must be x.
this is equal to 1. The probability to find it is equal to 1, so this is equal to minus 1. Now in the end, what is p infinity? At infinity, what happened? Either the particle is killed or it is out. So what is this probability to find it inside? 0. That's right. So this is 0 minus 1. Now we have integrated this from 0 to infinity. So this is really what is called the flux here. So I'll call it the flux, J of S ds. This is this term, minus the minus, so this is, actually I call it minus the flux, and this is minus 0 to infinity of integration from A to B of k of x, px of t dx. Now I'm going to do something drastic here. So everything is okay? So this is this, this is this, and this is this with integration. I just integrated from 0 to infinity, where J of S is the flux. J of S is the flux, which is the difference here of the fluxes at A and B. Right, this is d dp dx at A minus d dp dx at B. Now I'm going to do something drastic starting from now. You ready? Can I have your attention? That's it. Now what? What is this? What is this?
The first one must be 0.
What?
The first term is 0.
Why?
Because the
This is this. Well, okay. Let's pronounce. This is now where things start to be the connection with the physics. Let's use the words to describe what is this.
well, it's a probability flux.
That's it. So what is the meaning of a flux? Is something that is going.
Do you integrate really to infinity to A?
That's the
So 0 to
time, yeah.
Yeah, this is the time. ds is the time.
Yeah.
So this is the flux out. So if you integrate the probability flux, it's what's if you have 100 particles inside, what does this term represent? The fraction of particles are going to escape at the boundary. So what is the term if you have one particle?
It's the probability of.
That's right. So what is it?
The exit probability then?
This is the probability.
It's a flux
Not
that.
killing, but not being
What?
killed. Of not being killed.
That's right. So this is exactly, so now we have found that this is the interpretation of this term. This is the probability that the time to exit is below the time to be killed. Because this is exactly the fraction of particles that are out. So now this is interesting because we start to show how you present probability questions in terms of solution of partial differential equations. So this is exactly the integral from 0 to infinity of g over s ds. Now, let me remind you that this is exactly now an identity of probability. So what is equal to 1 minus this,
The anti-probability.
which is equal to, now 1 minus this, which is the probability that tau killing is less than t. This plus this equals 1. Now you get exactly the expressions. So this is exactly the probability to be killed in the interval. This is k of x, p x of t dx. Now let's continue. You understand the idea? The idea is now you can formulate questions of interest. For example, what's the time, what's the probability that an ion has reached the end of the channel before it is trapped? Now you can have it by saying, now I need to solve this equation. So for example, what's the probability to be killed before time t? This is to be killed at the end of the process. Now suppose now you want to make a picture, you have until 1 hour, you know that the process is going to last 2 hours. What is the probability? What is the probability to be killed before time t? So we know that this is the probability to be killed before exit, right? So if we want to have an information about time t, what shall I do with this? Instead of integrating from 0 to infinity, I should integrate from, that's right. So let's do it. So now from 0 to t, we get what? This is 0 to t, 0 to t. Now this is going to stay equals, at time 0, this stays -1. But this now is going to be integration from a to b of pt of x dx, right? So what's the probability to be, so here, yeah, so I'm sorry, there was a minus here, So I can take this term and put it in the other side, this one, that's the one that's survived, right? This I can put it back here, and now I have the distribution. So let's write it this, and I'm going to add it in here, a to b of pt of x dx. Now this is going to be with a minus, so this go here with a minus, but then I put plus everywhere. Plus, 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 plus. And now I remove it from here. Now how do you read this equation? It's 1 equal 1 plus this, right? So what is the meaning of this term? This is the integral of the flux from 0 to t. So this is the fraction of particles that have escaped
Until t.
yeah, before time t. So now we have it. So what is now the probability to be killed before time t? Where is the term? Yeah, this is exactly this. So this is exactly integration from 0 to t, integration from a to b, k of x, px of t, dx. And that's it. This is exactly the probability to be killed. This is exactly the probability to have escaped before time t, and this is exactly the probability of
Remain.
that's right. This is what we have calculated. We have said it somewhere. Probability to still to be in the domain in time t. Now you see that you can get what you think you're interested in terms of the solution. So it's not trivial if you think about it. Before we did all of this, to formulate correctly the questions, you see how it depends now on the killing, on the probability, and how you have to integrate. All right, so we did this one. We did the probability of being killed. Yeah, and the last thing, what's the probability? So we set the probability to be killed. So let me see if we have done all of this. Probability to be killed, to be absorbed. The probability, what is the probability to be killed at position x? You know, you want to disappear at the specific, so what is the probability to be killed at position x?
At any time.
At any time.
So then it's integral from 0 to infinity.
That's right.
K of x. P.
That's it. So you do integration from 0 to infinity of k of x, px of t, and for example starting position y dx. Now you understand the way of thinking. Okay, so I think we have enough of this. Yeah. So this is now all the concept. Now you can apply it. You can apply them.
But you could also add a source, right?
What do you mean a source?
Like you can also have not a killing but a birth. You know, the more particles spawning.
Yeah, sure. Now you can do whatever you want. You can. This is to introduce the subject of an external event on the particle, on the probability. Now you can do this and look at it, for example, not of a perspective of one particle, but the perspective of a population. And if they are independent particles, now you can say that, for example, you have a source of injection, and you look at how things are moving.
That last integral should be with respect to t.
Yeah, it's true. Sorry. Yeah, the idea is that you can now formulate these probabilities in terms of solution of the Fokker-Planck equation. And why this is important? Because in some cases you can calculate and you can find expressions. And so I'm not going to do that here, but if you're interested, you can do it for yourself. For example, when k of x is a constant, for example, a constant k0. Another possibility is k of x equal delta Dirac at position, any position, let's equation A. So you go back, you have to solve this equation and calculate all of this quantity of interest. And now you can say, for example, suppose you have a channel and you have one point somewhere that, or you have a killing that is located at source. Let me call it delta, let's call it point B, where you have the killing source or killing point. And then you're interested, what's going to be the probability that you will reach this before being trapped? All right, so if you're interested, this is what we have solved about 10, 12 years ago. This is with Shus, myself, and Marchewska. And this was in Phys Rev E 2005. If you're interested, we did the calculation, so I will refer to this article. Now, how do you do precise calculation when you have a delta Dirac? When you have a delta Dirac, you have to use a Fourier. You have to go to the Fourier space and you have to integrate. So there is here some calculations. All right. So this is, I leave this as an exercise. So let's finish. I'll finish with for this part and then we'll break. About just the general concept using Wiener integrals. So if we integrate in infinite space to understand that the survival probability, exactly how it enters. So we're going to study this term here for general trajectory to show that when you discretize, this is I show for continuous. This is for continuous stochastic processes. But if you have also a discrete process, that you can come out with the process of being killed. The process of being killed here before escape can be is exactly the limit of what you think when you have a discrete process, and then we'll break. So what I have in mind here, so this is for continuous processes, that is X solution of the stochastic equation, which should be written somewhere, which is this one. Now if you discretize it, you know, you look at the Euler scheme for this. You have, now it depends on delta T. Now how do you do killing for something that is discrete? And we'll see that all of this works. It converges and it works. So this is just a remark, really. Yeah, I have erased exactly the wrong. Okay, never mind. So this is now killing rate for discrete stochastic equation. So suppose, you know, instead of having this, you have the process which is x of t plus delta t equals x of t plus bx of t delta t plus sigma of x of t d omega, right? So you have this. So what's the probability? How do you write the probability that x at time t1 is in the domain, call it d or omega or whatever, so this is d. The process at time tn is x. And the particle, so it was alive and it died between t and t plus delta t. Condition that it started at 0. How do you write this? All right, so we need for this to discuss the infinitesimal propagator. That is how you go. So what is the meaning of this? You have a trajectory. We started to discuss this. You discretize it. You look at point at time t1, t2, up to tn. So this is xt1, xtn. And a bad thing happened between t and t plus delta t. So this is the last time after tn. It died. So how we write this? First of all, we need to write down, you propagate from point to point, and you're alive. So what is the transition probability for a Brownian particle? This is the exponential of x minus y. This is a classical kernel. So this is exponential of yj minus xtj minus ax of tj. This is squared. Yeah, and let's divide. So this is multiplied by, so this is dy. And then we have 2 pi delta t. And let's, okay, we can say this is a sigma, this is a determinant of sigma. So let me, okay, so we can have it like determinant of sigma xti. And here we have to divide by, no, but this is not good. Let's suppose here sigma is identity, so I don't have to carry all of this. This is 2 pi delta t, and this is 4 d. So sigma is equal, let's say, to 2d, square root of 2d. So this is 4d, and there is a d here. And so this is the probability to move from xti to xj for this process. So this is b. And I suppose sigma is square root of 2d. Multiply by what? By the probability of not to be killed. And we have discussed this at the beginning. This is this. Probability not to be killed. This is 1 minus k minus t of xti, xtj. And we have to multiply. Now you have to integrate n times. So this is omega, this is n times. And at position x, you die at position x at time t, so you multiply by k of x, multiply by delta t. So this is the probability to move wherever you want without being killed, multiplied by the probability to die at position x at time t. Or t or tn, this is, tn is t here. Okay, so now so this is exactly, this converges when n goes to infinity to, so if we integrate this delta t yeah, so now if we're interested in this, the probability to be killed before exiting, this quantity when n goes to infinity, so if when n goes to infinity, that is when you refined here the grids of time, this actually converges to this quantity. Why? Because, so here we have to multiply, yeah, this quantity here, the product of all of these will converge to this probability distribution function. And if we integrate over x, we'll have this term. And this contains exactly the integral of t. As you remember, when you multiply this, what we did at the beginning, the probability that the killing is bigger than t. When we looked at it, this was converging to the exponential something, and which I remember I told you was a solution of the Fokker-Planck equation with a killing. You remember at the beginning I did that to show you that there was an exponential of this that were entering in the solution of the equation. All right, so what we have is that when n goes to infinity, and this again, I'm not showing you the detail, this converges to the integral from 0 to infinity of integration of omega of k of x, p x of t conditional y dx. So this is called the Wiener. This is called the Wiener integral. Yeah. So this is the transition probability. This is the probability to survive up to time t. And you are killed at x. Right, so let me write what is the meaning of this. This is the probability of surviving up to time t, and you are killed at x. Now what we have to do here, we have to integrate over t from 0 to infinity and over the domain. So if we take this and we integrate this, so I'm not going to write this, so let's call it phi n. So if you integrate phi n of x and t, of capital T, then integration of omega of phi n x and t dx dt, when you integrate from 0 to infinity, this converges to this. And this is the limit that corresponds to what we have discussed in dimension 1. All right, I'm not describing this in detail. This is to show that if you have a discrete process, it converges to what we think is correct. And the underlying proof has to do with the Wiener integral, where you discretize, you take a sample of points along your trajectory, you calculate, so this is here, I forgot to write, there is here multiplied by dy1, dyn, right? This is the Gaussian kernel integrated dy. So this is the probability to be at the point y, and so you do it as many times as you have points in here. Now, this is 1 minus, this is the probability to be alive. This is the probability to be killed at this last point. And then we integrate over x, and integrate over time. And this converges as n goes to infinity, so I'm not going to do the proof. It converges to this, where p is the solution of the Fokker-Planck equation that I have just erased, which is on your so this is solution, p is solution of this equation in that n dimension of the survival Fokker-Planck equation. S is for survival. All right? So the conclusion that you write, I don't have space anymore, is that if you go to a discrete process, and if we do all the analysis which means for simulations, we can analyze everything in the continuous space, in the continuous formalism, to extract the quantity of interest. So we need not just to solve the associated partial differential equations. All right, I think we'll break now. And when we'll come back when there is a little bit more to be done here, we're going to discuss just as problems what happened for different number of particles, and then we'll move on to the solution of the exit problem for a limit cycle. Escaping, and the motivation, I'm not sure I will do it now or maybe later, is about how a virus infects cells. And you see that now we have everything more or less to start tackling this kind of question from biology. Suppose you're interested in a class of viruses that needs to enter into the nucleus. The nucleus is where the genetic material is located, and there are small pores. About 2% of the fraction of the surface is occupied by pores, by nuclear pore. So suppose you start with a particle trajectories, which is moving here and can be described. So we have seen this, what you have demonstrated in many series of articles, that the homogenization trajectories, so this is an example of a trajectory, can be written as b of x plus, let's say, square root of 2d. And here this was 2d of x, double d dot. So this is a stochastic differential equation for the virus, for a virus. And this accounts for microtubule organizations. It accounts for many different things. And what happened is that the cell has some kind of defense property. And the defense property, we can extract this as a killing rate. Killing rate or killing function, k of x, that can depend on the position. And now you're interested in the following question. If you start with 100 viruses, what's the probability that, you know, one of them arrives, alive? So let's list all the interesting questions we would like to solve. Now that we have seen that this kind of question can be formulated as a function of the solution of the Fokker-Planck equation, of the survival Fokker-Planck equation. And of course, one step that I'm not going to do here today is to solve actually this kind of Fokker-Planck equation, which you can in some limit. Let's say when the nuclear pore are very small, this is the next class, we'll introduce a narrow escape theory. And this can be solved in this approximation of small holes. So now, for those of you who are interested, we can start to look at what's the probability. So those are the list of questions. What is the probability that the first virus, so suppose first virus, so suppose out of n, we have n initial viruses that enter. So this is the initial number. What is the probability that the first virus arrives to a nuclear pore before time t? So what is this? This is the probability. This is the probability that tau first is less than t. It arrives, and of course, conditioned that the first is not killed. Because if it is killed, it's not the first. Condition that tau first is less than tau killed. So then the question is, how do you link this with the survival probability. Let's assume that all viruses are independent, and they all satisfy the probability distribution of a single viruses. It's a classical Fokker-Planck equation. So the survival Fokker-Planck equation, which is dp/dt, this is the one we have written 3 times already today, is L of p minus k of x p. This is the Fokker-Planck equation. Survival Fokker-Planck equation. How can we express this as a function of this? Right? This is the mission. So this is question number 1. Question number 2. What is the probability that k viruses arrive alive? That is k out of n. What is probability that k viruses arrive alive at the nuclear pore? Nuclear pore, this is exactly the region where they can escape, because once they enter, this is the only places that they can go. They can either die or enter here. This is the model. Probability that k arrive, all right. And now we can ask also a slightly different question. What is the probability that the k viruses arrives alive? Now, what is the probability that the k viruses that arrive alive? Okay, what is the probability that q viruses arrive before time t when k viruses will ultimately arrive? Right? So you want at time t, you want to have k of them that are inside the nucleus, because they are there, and you have k minus q that are going to arrive, but they are not yet inside when you are making your picture. So k minus q viruses are still in the cytoplasm, are still outside at time t. So this is about probability, and now we can also discuss timing. So question number 3. What is the mean first passage time? What is the mean first passage time for the first virus? For the first virus to arrive, when they are a total of n. You have n viruses. You want to know when they are going to arrive. What is the time? What is the mean first passage for the first one? And of course, the idea of all of this is to be able to do some calculation of this mean first passage time as a function of the dynamics, the number of narrow pores, of the number of entering viruses, to have the expression in terms of. All right, so think about this, and we can do all of this solution together. This is just to start thinking about questions. So what is the mean first passage for the first virus to arrive? What is for the last to arrive? Right, now you can think about this condition, you can calculate that by conditioning. You say that what is the last to arrive? Condition that they are all going to arrive, or n minus 1 are going to arrive. You know, you can think about different ways to calculate. When you have the conditioning, then you multiply by the probability that it remains k particles. So what's the probability that remains k particle up to time t? This is, you remember, this is the exponential of minus the integral of 0 to t of x of s.
I have sort of a general question. So the whole approach to use the mean first passage time is only really insightful in cases where it really depends that you have a first particle arriving somewhere. You can't really look at more or less equilibrated solutions where you have, like, for instance, a certain flux to a given target. Is that correct?
So in here, associated to all of this, I'm talking about mean first passage time, but we could discuss, you know, the entire distribution, because this is like before time t, when you introduce time t, you look at the entire distribution. Mean first passage time is just one endpoint. This is when you integrate from 0 to infinity. But you can really do things here when you are interested in the distribution. So here you don't have to do it. You don't have to be in any equilibrium or whatever. You just, the point of this exercise is to connect this with something that is not at equilibrium. This is the solution of the Fokker-Planck equation.
Yeah, no, of course, but
But this is, then you don't have to be at equilibrium. Here, of course, when you ask the question, what is the mean first passage time for the last virus to arrive? It means that that's it. They are all dead, all arrived. So you look from 0 to infinity, and you look at the distribution of your process, and what was the time for the last one to arrive. But you can be, for example, interested, as we have done in this question here, what is the probability that you have Q viruses that arrived alive before time t? Now you are in the transient regime. So this is much more complicated. I mean, because it uses the time-dependent question. You are not going to integrate from 0 to infinity. It's exactly integrating as we have done previously when we, it was erased, but when we calculated things, you know, before time t. This is an important class, because this is the connection between asking questions in probability about and connecting this with solution of partial differential equation that accounts for the geometry of the domain. And then the solution of this, you know, you can use different methods, Laplace methods, conformal mappings. Then you can use it depending if you are dimension 2 or if you can have reduction to dimension 2. This can be solved. This can be seen in solution of the equation. So solution of the equation is a separate story. But this is just the connection. Last week we discussed solution of PDEs. This is here connections. This is very important because a lot of questions in probability are very subtle, very they are difficult to solve if you don't use this connection. Actually, you cannot, especially when you have geometrical features into it. It's impossible. That's why the PDE, and this is exactly what PDEs capture. PDE captures information about the geometry of the domain, the geometry of the boundary, and that's why it's important. All right. So it remains 10 more minutes, and now we are going to start there's also other things, but we have already discussed conditional processes. I'm not going to do this. So I propose that you do that for next time, for next week. I mean for next month, for the next month, really. And then what we're going to do now is, I would like to do so before we start narrow escape and diastrate, and really next time people interested from the conference should come, because this is going to start really at the level of research. So today we are going to start a class like this. I want to discuss solution of mean first passage time, and actually the entire spectrum for this non-self-adjoint operator. This is the first time this has been solved. This is what we did, and so the paper is under press, so it's actually a series of 4 papers. And why this is important? Because this is a time-dependent problem. So the goal of this class is to discuss solutions, asymptotic solutions of the Fokker-Planck equation and here we'll take the example of the escape, the activation escape across a limit cycle. And this is, I'll give some motivation for this. So the motivation is, so let's give a general introduction. So again, we have seen last time that if you have a limit cycle, we have a boundary of a domain. If there is here a limit cycle, an attractor. Here we're interested in when trajectories are going to converge back in time to the limit cycle. Right, so if you start like this, you can, for example, rotate inside and then converge to that point. So which means that if you start on the limit cycle, you stay on the limit cycle. So x dot equals b of x dot, this is a solution, this is a periodic solution. But as soon as you start inside, the trajectory of this dynamical system, they converge as time goes to infinity to the critical point P. Right? And except the first one, x star, this is a limit cycle solution. So, which means that you stay on this. And now, the same question, you are interested. So, this is one example. So, the question we are going to be interested in is to calculate, for example, the escape of this problem when you have small noise. So, what is the mean first passage time? Mean first passage time out from this domain. I call it omega, in first passage time from omega. So this is the first question. The first question is, what is the distribution of escape time? Distribution of escape time. That is, if you look, if you are with your watch and you are looking at the trajectory escaping, and each time there is a trajectory that escapes, you put a cross. What is the histogram of the distribution? So distribution of escape time, the distribution of exit points. That is, where are the points when they come out? And I'll be interested in the following question. When the critical point is located, so this question comes out in many problems in biology, because if you have a Hopf bifurcation of a dynamical system, you have an attractor, the generic dynamical system for Hopf bifurcation, you know, it's so Hopf bifurcation is theta dot equal constant and rho dot equals minus rho 1 minus rho squared, right? So rho equals 0 is an attractor, while rho equals 1, this is the, so this is in rho theta coordinate, right? If you look at the point Z this coordinate, and you look at this dynamical system, theta equals constant. So what are the critical points here? So when rho equals 0, you see that rho is 0, so this is a critical point, and rho equals 1, and rho equals 1 means limit cycle, because this is in this coordinate. And so this is exactly, so of course this is the picture, you have something like this, and you have a trajectory that goes here even directly here without oscillating to 0, or maybe with oscillating. Theta dot, so theta is constant, so for example, suppose this is 1. Yeah, so I don't know, so it's this you oscillate here to 0. And here this is your limit cycle that you have here. Limit cycle, which is rho equals 1. So this is this, you deform this as you need, and you obtain this structure. All right, so now, we will be interested in the following situation where the critical point here, so this is known since 60 years, the dynamical system, and we will see generically how you study the escape. But we will be interested in the following situation, which is a situation where we can calculate the entire spectrum, is when this point is located close to the boundary. That is the distance of the critical point, let's call it P or C. Now C is the limit cycle, so the P, the critical point, PC, this is the critical point. So distance of PC to the boundary is of the order of epsilon where epsilon is the size of the noise. So we will discuss this case in particular. Why? Because it happened actually in some model of neuronal activity. We discovered this a couple of years ago, that this point here is very close to the boundary. And why this is very peculiar is because if you start from any trajectory, you are going to be attracted here. But if the noise, when you enter into this region, becomes of the order, the distance here is of the order of the amplitude of the noise, what happened is that a trajectory, when it arrives here, it can escape. But what happened if the trajectory do not escape here? What happened?
It's stuck there.
It's not stuck because you have the dynamics. But
Cycling.
that's right. And this is a very interesting phenomenon because the particle arrives here, it can either escape or it goes here. But this, it's very hard to escape from here because it's very far away. So it has only to cycle and come back here where it resumes the same thing. It can either escape or rotate. And this allowed us to quantify actually the clock at which particle escape. Because either the particle escape now, or it has to go around once before escaping. And so this is reminiscent of what is called stochastic resonance. Now we understand what is the clock. The clock is the frequency at which you rotate, which is given by the eigenvalues of the matrix of the dynamical system at the critical point. This is the imaginary part, because we have here, it cycles. So we have here the imaginary part of the eigenvalues that give you the rotation. So either you escape at 0 at a certain time, or you have to wait 2 pi divided by omega, which is the time, to make one rotation. And so this should give us the intuition of what's going to be the solution of the Fokker-Planck equation, which should give us the distribution of exit time, time dependent. Right? And so this is important. This is what you have exactly in stochastic resonance. I mean, it's a form of stochastic resonance, but this has never been described like this. Usually stochastic resonance has to do with two wells that are moving in time. There's a time dependent. Here there is no time dependent evolution. It's a two-dimensional, you know, mostly in stochastic resonance, you can have it by introducing a time dependence of a double well that are oscillating in time, but they are dimension 1. Here this is dimension 2, but the structure of dimension 2 gives you the clock. It is rotating, and then you have the noise. But the subtlety of all of this is that the distance between this point and the limit cycle is small. And this will give us a lot of this is the ingredient you need. I mean, it's the ingredient we've discovered that leads to a kind of peculiar behavior, which are actually important in many different situations. Okay, so we'll have one more minute because I wanted to do more, but I think it's important to give you a motivation. Why we're doing is important, where we are going. And so for this, what we need to solve, what we are going to see is what are the methods. So we are going to discuss next time the methods, which is really the WKB methods to solve the mean first passage time equation, which is Laplacian, which is L of P really. L of U, L star of U equal -1. But we are also going to use it to solve the direct equation LP equals 0, where L is the adjoint operator that we have discussed. So in here, L star of U, this is epsilon Laplacian U plus B gradient U. And we are going to solve it also, we are going to use it to solve the entire spectrum, that is L of P equals minus lambda epsilon P. And why is that? Because the time-dependent solution for this, you can write it. And the time-dependent solution, Px of t, can be extended with the eigenvalues, lambda I or lambda k. Psi k, this is the solution of this equation. Psi k of x, and multiplied by t. And we have to take the real part of all of this, because they are imaginary. I mean, they are imaginary component. So if you sum over this, and there is an initial coefficient, let's call it ck. The ck is a coefficient. Ck are the eigenfunctions. You know what are eigenfunctions, right? They are the solution of this equation. Non-zero eigenfunctions. So if we have this, if we know all of them, we have the time-dependent solution. And so we know we will be able to calculate exactly the time it takes. Time-dependent problem without assuming anything about if it's stationary. Actually, it will be not necessarily stationary, about the exit time. So if you are interested, for example, in the channel, you can look at it as the arrival of particles. Here all the particles, all the trajectories are independent from each other. When you have correlated particle, I told you, you have to go to higher dimension. This is the way to handle this. So how do you calculate this? How do you calculate lambda k? How does that depend on the geometry? How does that depend on the oscillation? What are the ingredients? So how to calculate, so how to compute how psi k, most important is lambda k, depends, how they depend on the field B, on the noise, on the domain, right? So this is, to answer this question, we will develop WKB, which is to find, assuming that you have U epsilon or P epsilon, or the eigenfunction is the same, to have an expression of the form k epsilon of x exponential psi divided by epsilon x, where psi and k epsilon, so k epsilon, we can write it, k epsilon can be written as k0 plus epsilon k1 of x. So those are regular functions. I mean, yeah, plus epsilon squared k2 of x. multiplied by a function q epsilon of x, where this function is between 0 and 1. And this is called what we are going to see. And we already saw it last time. This is called a boundary layer equation. All right, so I'll stop here so that you can get your meeting on time. This will occupy at least 1 or 2 classes, right? And then we'll go to narrow escape for 1 or 2 classes, direct straight. And then we'll be ready to apply this to different questions in neuroscience, in nucleus organization, polymer physics. And we are basically at the middle of, a little bit less the middle, let's say 30% of the class. All right, so see you April 15.